On Tuesday, the 6th of November 2018, the United States will hold its biennial elections in what could prove to be one of the most consequential midterms for a generation. This video will explain the electoral map for the House, Senate, and gubernatorial races, give a brief overview of the ballot initiatives for each state, and highlight some of the more interesting races to watch. First, a note on polls, what they are and what they are not. Polls express a distribution of probabilities over successive events, not an expectation that we should have for the result of any particular event. If you roll a die, you have a 1 in 6 chance of rolling a 6 and a 5 in 6 chance of rolling 1 through 5. But that does not mean that we are able to predict which number will come up on any individual throw, and a 1 in 6 chance is actually fairly substantial odds. Over successive throws, we would expect the die to land on 6 multiple times. For the House, Senate, and gubernatorial elections this year, there are 509 election events, and some of these are going to produce results that are more than 2 standard deviations away from the mean. So be aware that while the distribution of probabilities that polls express should be fairly representative of the range of results that we observe, some of these races will not go the way that polls predict. So with that in mind, the House. Here, all 435 seats are up for election. Republicans currently control a majority with 235 seats to the Democrats' 193 seats, and there are 7 vacancies, 5 of which were Republican seats and 2 of which were Democratic. This means that the Democrats need to gain 23 seats in this election in order to reach the 218 seats required to take control of the House. Going into the election, Democrats on the generic ballot are polling an average of 8 points above Republicans, and President Trump's approval is an average of 11 points below his disapproval, so providing the people entering these polls vote, this is likely to be a fairly good election for the Democrats and a fairly poor election for Republicans. The poll analysis website 538 identifies 35 seats with a greater than 50% chance of changing hands, all but one of which is being held by Republicans, and a further 8 toss-up seats, all but one of which is currently held by Republicans. So the Democrats have significant opportunities here for gains, and the Republicans will be trying to mitigate their losses. The Democrats are probably looking at a 30 to 40 seat gain in the House, which would give them control. 538 gives them an 85% chance of taking 23 or more seats. The Senate is a different story. Republicans currently control a slim majority of 51 seats, but because the vice president can vote in the event of a tie, the Republicans can actually maintain a majority with just 50 seats, so the Democrats need to pick up 2 more seats in order to take control of the Senate. The Senate race further favours Republicans because not all of the seats are up for election. In 2018, only 1/3 of the seats are up, only 1/3 of those are competitive, and only 1/3 of those, 4 out of the 100 Senate seats, are thought to be close races with a strong likelihood of changing hands, though there are 9 with the potential for an upset. In this graphic, the rings represent incumbency, the fill represents how each race is likely to go, and the line represents the 50% mark for control of the Senate, which is 51 seats for Democrats but only 50 for Republicans. The easiest path for Republicans to increase their majority would be to retain Arizona and Nevada for 51 seats, take North Dakota for 52, and possibly Missouri for 53. But beyond that, the probability starts to drop off sharply, as despite how close all of these races are, the seats in Indiana and Florida are expected to be retained by their Democratic incumbents. The easiest path for the Democrats to take control would be to win in Arizona and Nevada for 50 seats, but then they either need to retain Heidi Heitkamp's seat in North Dakota, or take one of the long-shot seats in Texas, Tennessee, or Mississippi. These 3 seats would usually be considered very likely to stay red, but they have an unusual degree of uncertainty this year because 2 of them have lost their Republican incumbents to retirement, Bob Corker from Tennessee and Thad Cochran from Mississippi, and Texas has a particularly strong insurgent Democratic candidate in Beto O'Rourke. Conventional politics will still favour Republicans in these races, but times are strange and an upset is a real possibility, just not very likely. 538 gives Republicans an 85% chance of retaining the Senate. The most probable outcome appears to be a straight swap where the Democrats lose North Dakota but pick up Arizona. They may also pick up Nevada, as it does slightly favour the Democratic challenger Jackie Rosen, but beyond that they're hoping for a truly unusual confluence of events. In the gubernatorial races, 39 governorships are up in 36 states and 3 territories. Elections will be held in 26 of the 33 states with Republican governors, 9 of the 16 states with Democratic governors, and Alaska, which has an independent governor. There are also 2 territories up for election with Republican governors, 1 with an independent governor, and the District of Columbia with a Democratic mayor, though none of these territories or districts get any representation in Congress, so the results don't impact national politics. Currently, 40% of the population are governed by Democrats and 60% by Republicans. That is expected to flip so that 63% of the population are governed by Democrats and 37% by Republicans, though obviously the toss-up races of Ohio, Wisconsin, Nevada, Georgia, Kansas, and Alaska, despite leaning one way or the other as represented here, could easily go either way. Ballot measures, or referendums, are a form of direct democracy that allow the people of each state to vote on legislation or constitutional amendments themselves. This year, voters in 37 states will decide on 156 statewide ballot measures. Cannabis, or marijuana, is currently legal for recreational use in 9 states and for medical use in a further 22, which combined covers 64.8% of the US population. There are ballots in Missouri and Utah for medical use, which, if passed, would give 9.1 million more people access to medical marijuana, and ballot initiatives in Michigan, North Dakota, and Oklahoma for recreational use, which, if passed, would give 14.6 million more people access to recreational marijuana. Abortion is currently legal nationwide due to Roe v. Wade, a 1973 Supreme Court ruling, but Alabama and West Virginia are proposing amendments to their state constitutions designed to ban abortions in the event that this is overturned, and Oregon is proposing an amendment designed to restrict access to abortion. Renewable energy amendments are being proposed in Arizona and Nevada, who want a constitutional amendment to require that 50% of their electricity be produced from renewable sources by 2030, and in Washington there are ballots for a tax on carbon emissions and a tax on petroleum products transported through pipelines. Minimum wage increases are on the ballot in Arkansas for $11 an hour by 2021 and Missouri for $12 an hour by 2023. Marsy's Law, modelled after the 2008 California Victims' Bill of Rights, is on the ballot in 6 states: Georgia, Kentucky, Nevada, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Florida. Though it should be noted that Florida's version of this also bundles with it 2 stealth amendments, one which would keep the probably outgoing Republican governor's judges on the Florida Supreme Court for another 5 years, and another which would prohibit state courts from deferring to an administrative agency's interpretation of a state statute in lawsuits. This would cause litigation to flood the courts, crippling state administrative agencies as every action they take is halted until each lawsuit is resolved individually. Tax restrictions are being proposed in Arizona, California, Florida, North Carolina, Oregon, and Washington, designed to prohibit the government from enacting or raising taxes on various things. Idaho, Montana, Nebraska, Utah, and Oregon all have ballot initiatives to expand Medicaid coverage, and 15 states are considering a variety of election policy changes. Florida is proposing to restore voting rights to felons with Amendment 4, and Louisiana would like to disqualify recent felons from seeking office with Amendment 1. Maryland, Michigan, and Nevada are proposing automatic voter registration initiatives, while Arkansas and North Carolina would like to implement voter ID laws, and Montana would like to ban people from collecting a ballot on behalf of another person. Colorado, Michigan, Utah, and Missouri are proposing independent commissions to draw district maps instead of the state legislature, and Colorado, Massachusetts, North Dakota, and South Dakota are proposing various reforms to campaign finance and political spending. The most interesting races to watch this year are undoubtedly the Texas Senate race, where incumbent Republican Ted Cruz is facing a significant challenge from Democratic candidate Beto O'Rourke, the Georgia gubernatorial race, where Republican candidate Brian Kemp, who is also the sitting Secretary of State responsible for overseeing his own election, has engaged in apparent efforts to suppress the vote, and the Florida gubernatorial race, where Democratic candidate Andrew Gillum pulled off an upset in the primaries and appears poised to turn the state blue for the first time in nearly 2 decades. The Texas race is showing an unusual amount of enthusiasm, with a record-breaking number of people registered to vote and early voting up 500% from 2014. 538 only gives O'Rourke a 23% chance of beating Cruz, but this race will nevertheless be an interesting measure of how well the Democrats' political message can energize liberals and sway independents. In Georgia, Brian Kemp has been accused of attempting to steal his own election by using his office to suppress the turnout of Democrats by targeting black and other minority voters. 2 federal courts have rebuked his efforts to deregister thousands of black and naturalized citizens for things as petty as grammar errors in their applications. He's launched several fruitless investigations into voter registration groups, including the one founded by his opponent, Stacey Abrams, and just 2 days before the election, he announced an investigation into the Democratic Party of Georgia on the website voters use to check polling locations. This race will test the effect of such practices on voter turnout. 538 gives Kemp a 68% chance of winning. In Florida, environmental issues are dominating the state's politics as increasingly powerful hurricanes cause billions of dollars in damage, tens of thousands of Puerto Rican refugees arrive in the state after having their lives devastated, toxic algae blooms wash masses of dead sea creatures ashore, and climate change threatens to literally sink the state if no action is taken. Climate change skeptic DeSantis faces off against Gillum, a proponent of the scientific consensus on climate change, in a race which could make the environment a huge issue in 2020 as presidential candidates battle for voters in this important swing state. 538 gives Gillum a 77% chance of winning. Thank you to the following patrons who've supported this video. If you'd like to contribute, please check out the link and consider donating $1 or more toward the production of future content.